But we got to San Francisco, and all along the way, we had heard about this movie, Star Wars. And I actually had an iron-on Star Wars where the last letters turned into like the number 77 that had R2-D2 and C-3PO on them, and my brother and I had matching T-shirts.
That was Adam Bergeron, owner of the Balboa Theater. I'm Jeff. Welcome to Story San Francisco, a weekly podcast where San Franciscans from all walks of life share their stories, and you get to know your neighbors. In this podcast, Adam talks about his first visit to San Francisco, when he and his family drove across the country and ended up here at a very unique time in cinematic history. He goes on to tell the story of moving around a bit after college, and eventually ending up in the Bay Area, splitting his time for a while between Santa Cruz and San Francisco. Here's Adam.
I moved around a lot as a kid. But I say I'm from Connecticut because we lived there more than any other thing.
Can I ask why you guys moved around a lot?
You know, it was a combination of things. My parents were always kind of getting more education, and so we always had to move. So mom got a master's degree, and then moved so dad got a master's degree, and then he'd get a job after the master's degree, then he got a PhD, and you know, they just kind of popped around. Mm-hmm. And they were in the healthcare business, and you know, there was just a lot of moves. Mm-hmm. But I went to high school in Connecticut, and so that's easier to say. And one significant thing I will say, because this will tie into whole San Francisco and movie theaters, in 1977 we were moving from Connecticut, our first day in Connecticut, to North Carolina, and instead of going straight, we drove all the way across the country. Oh. And 1977 was a big year in America. Like, they had just had the bicentennial in 76. Right, it was kind of, you know, it felt like an exciting time when you were an 8-year-old kid.
Star Wars.
And
sorry, am I jumping the gun?
Yeah, well, and we left, I think, in May and came back in August. It was a long trip, and we went to all 48 contiguous states. And
I love your parents.
In a Toyota Corolla with a Starcraft camper pulled behind it.
Dude.
And so we did a lot of camping and a little bit of hotels, but we got to San Francisco, and all along the way we had heard about this movie, Star Wars. And I actually had an iron-on Star Wars where the last letters turned into like the number 77 that had R2-D2 and C-3PO on them, and my brother and I had matching T-shirts. We had that before we even ever saw the movie. Like, it was like a phenomenon.
How were you guys hearing about it? I'm just curious.
A good question. I think at like the KOA campgrounds, people knew about it.
Sure.
And every little town we went to, it was all a buzz. And sometimes we would stay in hotels, and I think on the news, long lines. You know, it was definitely a big buzz in America. And so we got to San Francisco, and my mom still doesn't know how they knew, but the Coronet Theater was the one that was where Lucas had his premiere. Mm-hmm. And so at this point, it was 2 months plus into the run, and they were still selling out every night. And we got in line and got tickets, and it was funny because we couldn't even all four sit together in the theater. That's how sold out it was. And my brother and I had seats together, but his was kind of broken and crooked, and he was too young to read the crawl, you know, Galaxy Far, Far Away crawl. I had to read it to him. But that was kind of the day that everything changed, right? I'm 8, he's 6, and you see Star Wars in a packed theater in San Francisco where it's special here, you know, and that was a big deal for me. That was that was a seminal moment.
What inspired them to do that direct move completely indirectly, just to do it? You said you went to all 48.
Yeah, my dad is an interesting guy, and he had this theory. It's a lot of theories, but one of them was that the eye of wonder. As a child, you have the eye of wonder, but if you don't open it up by the time you're 9 or 10, it won't open, and so you'll seek adventure if you're taught to seek adventure, but you won't if you're not. And so he sort of was always kind of nudging us towards adventures, and this was the one opportunity that we had.
And your 9th birthday was staring him in the face, saying,
right, exactly.
Get your kid out there before
right.
It closes.
Yep.
Wow.
Yeah. So we just
cool.
And so it was all the national parks and all the everything, but mainly the biggest takeaway was it was Star Wars.
Right.
Right. That was the biggest thing
in San Francisco.
San
First
Francisco.
Run. You were 8.
I was 8. Yeah.
I mean,
it was amazing too, because I was a sci-fi kid, I was a Star Trek kid, you know, and
Buck Rogers, anything like Flash Gordon kind of thing?
well, Buck Rogers came out in the movie
Is after.
81,
Is
I
after.
think, right? So, but I loved that too.
Yeah.
You know, and you know, I mean, it's sort of anything that went along with that, I was into it, you know. But at that point, Star Wars is, you know, then you've got this like kind of dirty, grimy, you know, underbelly world of outer space, which is never the way it was pictured before.
Creature
that.
cantinas and whatnot.
Right, exactly.
Did you get in on that trip, and after seeing the movie, did you get into the action figure stuff like right away, or did you ever?
Action figures hugely.
Yeah,
hugely. Like in Toys R Us, like scouring the racks to see what, you know, if the Jawa
was hidden
mini
behind
the
one that everyone has.
Exactly.
Totally.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow. So
the
that's
Greedo little doll.
Yeah. Wow. So you're 8 and you're seeing the whole fucking country. That's
which was pretty cool.
Insane. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. So you moved to North Carolina.
Yep.
Talk about more. Of
and that was this is the 70s. We lived in a big apartment complex in North Carolina. That was kind of neat, right? It was, you know, and I mean, as everybody who grew up after the 70s sort of gets told legend by those of us that did grow up in the 70s, it was like a feral time.
Yeah.
You know,
yeah.
As kids, you just left in the morning and you came back at night, and who knows what you did during the day, like, you know, stomp on a snake, and, you know, like you did a million little things that your parents never sort of asked what you did today.
I like to think of it as like we knew how to get hurt.
Right.
Like going out of the house meant I was going to get hurt, but it didn't matter. Meaning like I would fucking scrape my knees, I get the thing on my, you know.
Yeah.
Somehow, but it was okay. It wasn't a big deal.
Right. And when you had scrapes on your knees, your parents didn't say, "Oh, what happened to your knees?"
I mean, if it's actively bleeding, that's different. But like coming home with like rocks, you know, embedded in your knees, that's totally normal as a 70s kid.
Yep. So it's funny because after North Carolina, we moved to Arlington, Texas, and I just visited 2 weeks ago Arlington, Texas for the first time, and it had been like almost 40 years.
Changed a little bit.
Well, oddly,
I'm from Fort Worth, by the way.
Oh, okay. Okay, there you go.
Worth.
So I found my house, no problem. Found my middle school, no problem. But I used to ride my bike to Six Flags over Texas,
you did.
where the Shockwave, right, was the first roller coaster in the world that had the double loop.
Loop-de-loop.
Yeah. And so everyone had told me, "Oh, you're going to be amazed at how much Arlington has changed." But as I was driving in, I was like, "Well, there's the Shockwave, and there's my house," and it all sounded the parts that I knew sort of seemed the same. But the one thing that was notable was because we used to ride our bikes all the time from our house to Six Flags, and to over the highway there was a place called Whitewater, which is probably called something else now, but it's like a water park. And then the Texas Rangers played baseball right there too, right? And they used to play in kind of a minor league stadium, and now they have a big kind of a badass
stadium. It was literally
stadium.
a minor league stadium.
Yeah. And but I can remember that as we drove, I was like, "Oh, no way!" The bike ride from my house to the Shockwave to Six Flags or to a Ranger game is a few miles.
Yeah.
You know, like, and I definitely, like, you have to go over the highway, you have to do all kinds of stuff. And as we were driving back, I was like, God, it's so weird that we rode our bikes this far.
And it was probably hot as fuck.
Yeah, like 100 and...
Just always hot as fuck.
There was one summer where it was 100 degrees for 56 straight days.
1980.
Was that 1980?
Yes, I had the shirt.
That's so 56 straight days, which is the same number as Joe DiMaggio's hit streak, which always sticks with me. You know,
of course.
Yeah.
Wow. So I didn't realize about that about you that you had a little stint in Texas. How old were you in your Texas days then?
That was middle school.
Okay.
7th grade, and then into 8th grade, and then back to Connecticut halfway through 8th grade.
Okay. So you finished out high school in Connecticut.
Yep.
Any other good stories from?
Connecticut, great. You know, I mean, kind of wild and woolly. It was a little crazy in Connecticut too. I don't know, bunch of crazy people that I'm still friends with. You know, and my brother, who's still my best friend in the world. And then college.
Can he read now?
He can. He's a pretty good reader now.
He can read if it's like a crawl.
Pretty solid reader. Yeah.
So, like, would you say like pretty typical high school? Nothing really. I was gonna because I'm wondering like where or when movies like really took over, or
right. Well, so I don't know. It's the movies thing is funny because I love movies the way everyone loved movies, and it wasn't. I didn't go to school for movies or anything like that. I just sort of had a general understanding of that. I love getting lost in a movie. Quite often, even to this day, I'll see a movie with somebody smarter than me, and they'll break the movie down, and I'll go, God, I never thought of that. Yeah. I'm not smart enough to get all of that, that nuance.
Yeah.
But I guess I love just getting lost in the story. That's sort of where the magic is, right? There's getting lost in the entertainment of it and going to a different world and that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. And I'm guessing, like me, you grew up in like the VCR, the beginning of the VCR phase and stuff like HBO and all that other stuff. But nothing ever took away the magic of going to a theater.
No, right? Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Even if the theater was kind of like the shitty theater in town, I always loved it.
Yeah. Well, it's you're going out to do something, right? And what's funny, because if we're segue to the movie theater experience, the movie theater experience is always going to die, right? Every day, it's ever since TV started. It's like the movie theaters are going to die, even just a couple of years ago, Netflix, like, oh well, nobody's going to the movie theaters anymore, except for that they are, right? Where are you going to go on a date, and how are you going to get out of the house, and what there's a million reasons. You don't have to get invited to the movies. You can just go to the movies. It's your choice. And it happens a bunch of times a day. You can see this movie any one number of 3, 4. If you think about the multiple theaters it's at, you can see this movie 10 times today.
So like after you graduated high school, what were you doing?
College in Boston, Northeastern University. And then a trip across country where we were moving to Santa Fe, New Mexico, and with some friends. And we stopped by Santa Cruz, California on the way, and I just pulled in. I was like, holy shit, I live here now. This is crazy. Why would I live anywhere but here? But I had already, and this is the late 80s now, so I'd already written away for, like literally written a letter and sent a check in the mail for this apartment that we were getting in Santa Fe. So I had to actually go there and do that. And Santa Fe didn't work out. Between the four of us, we got fired from 9 jobs in a super short amount of time.
You hear that, Guinness Book of World Records?
Like everyone had at least 2, and somebody had 3.
Wow.
And Wolfgang Puck fired my buddy James. That was the last one. That was the straw that broke the camel's back. And we left in the middle of the night, and we drove back to Santa Cruz.
You all agreed as a group? You're like, Santa Cruz is where we
were
should
sort
have
of
been.
1 foot out the door already.
Yeah.
It was like, Jesus,
Yeah.
And it was like bad decisions made by young people. Like I had used my fake ID to get a job because you had to be 21 to be a waiter. And so I just thought, never realizing that, there's numbers on those IDs that correspond to like official numbers. And by the time I was going to get a paycheck, I was going to get caught. Like never even crossed my mind, And but went to Santa Cruz, and it was great. Like California, who doesn't want to live in California? And once you're here, it's the best place.
What year would that have been that you?
1989.
89. You landed.
I was here for the earthquake.
Yes.
In 89.
Okay.
Yeah.
How was that?
We were sitting down to watch the World Series. So a guy had come over and sold us weed. Mm-hmm. His name was Avi. He had like a very hippie name, and he was a super hippie guy. And I remember he had a fanny pack, and the joint had been rolled, and we were gonna light it up at the beginning of the World Series, and then all of a sudden,
Did you ever light it?
No. And it was a weird thing too that we found out later. So Avi's. Out of his fanny pack, all his money had fallen out, and somebody there was a big group of people in the house. Somebody had scooped up the money, and I just didn't know until much later that somebody had done that. And Avi was freaking out because he couldn't find his money, but yet we're in the midst of this huge emergency, And I remember being like, "Shut up, man! Stop thinking about the money. You're gonna find the money." But he wasn't gonna because somebody had stolen his money, you know. So it was weird. It was a weird thing, and all the dishes and glasses, fell into the living room, and it was a rental. It was kind of actually, in retrospect, it was a nice rental house for us. I don't know why they rented it to us, but both chimneys had two chimneys, and they both kind of collapsed into the room,
yikes.
and then. Everybody in the whole neighborhood moved all their furniture out to the front. Mm-hmm. Everyone had small front yards. Mm-hmm. And so, we just put our couches and stuff, and everybody else in the neighborhood was there. And
out.
And there was many aftershocks. And I can remember all anybody wanted to do was kind of get drunk the whole time. And then there were those moments where you'd be like, God, I'm too, what if another one happens? I'm so drunk now.
Or aftershocks.
Yeah, because they kept on happening.
Yes.
The aftershocks kept on happening. Yes. Yeah,
I'm just wondering if that joint is still out there.
Right? No, I'm pretty sure.
Maybe
pretty sure it got smoked.
If it was lit, maybe there wouldn't have been an earthquake.
Right?
Take us.
Then,
let's keep going.
You
survived.
Survived. Started working at a restaurant called the Crepe Place in Santa Cruz, which I later bought and owned for many years. And so that's a sort of a funny story too. But I worked there, and I was the general manager there kind of most of the way through my 20s.
Okay. Was it a Crepe Place? So I moved here 20 years ago, and there were some of them are barely still around, but they all had a kind of look and feel. The menus were
not at all like those.
Not at all like that. Okay.
Not like a squat and gobble. Right. So this is like you sit down at a table, you get served. Okay. Oddly enough, the San Francisco sort of Crepe Cartel, it's a number of Jordanian families, because I actually worked at one of those too at one point. Crepes on Cole, which is still there in Cole Valley. What I love, still owned by Heil and Durar, awesome. The same people that employed me in 1995, awesome. I think it was. But
Crepe Cartel.
The crepe place in Santa Cruz was opened in 1973.
Okay.
And a lot of the crepes that you see on the menu boards, the colored menu boards at the Crepe Cartels here in San Francisco, are the same names as the one. The Crepe Place is sort of the mothership, the one in Santa Cruz. And it was just kind of this old school. It had a couple of different locations. The earthquake destroyed it, and it had to move into a different location, which is where I discovered it and where it still is. So it's coming up on 50 years, and it's a Santa Cruz institution. And years later when I bought it, I made a little music venue there too, and we did 300 live music events a year, and that was super fun too. Yeah. So I had in 1995. I had sort of spent a year living in both Santa Cruz and San Francisco, going back and forth with kind of a job at each end of it, and had an apartment in San Francisco, but just for whatever reason, honestly, it was just so comfortable in Santa Cruz. It was hard to to sort of leave it behind, but always knew that I wanted to live in San Francisco. Always sort of aspired to be a city person.
Okay.
But just sort of tough to make the transition.
Sure. Did you meet your wife down in Santa Cruz or?
Met my wife in San Francisco.
Okay.
Yep.
Sorry.
Yep. No, that's fine. And
but convincing a girlfriend or spouse to move with you wasn't part of that
didn't
equation.
Need to, yeah. And luckily, she's a complete city person. She grew up in Brooklyn and then moved to L.A. and then San Francisco. So this is the smallest city she's ever lived in,
Right.
So and she's just complete city through and through. She gets it in a million ways. Mm-hmm. And now our two kids who are now basically adult kids. Mm-hmm. They're complete city kids too.
Right, obviously.
Yeah. In 2002 in San Francisco, we opened 12 Galaxies, which was my first business. Okay. And so Robert Levy and I and our wives, Jamie and his wife was Kat, and I had two small kids. So we opened a music venue, and we opened it 3 weeks before the Independent opened, and we didn't know. Had we known the Independent was opening, we might have rethought our little mom and pop operation. Some of my favorite memories are 12 Galaxies memories. Way better than the Independent, but we just didn't have. And no, nothing wrong with the Independent. Yeah, no, not at all. No, independent's totally great. But we were just a couple of guys trying to make it work with no clout, whereas all the other clubs in town were run by larger organizations that just had clout. And so we sort of made it just on we had a lot of friends in the music business, and that whole freak folk scene kind of came up at the same time as 12 Galaxies started. So we would just kind of rode that wave. And honestly, the history of 12 Galaxies and the history of the freak folk movement are sort of hand in hand in a lot of ways. Mm-hmm. But there was also a million other things. Like we just did we were trying to do shows every night. And so you're doing what you can do, right. And it was, the space was probably a little too big for what we, for the shows we were putting on a lot of the time. I'd say, I often have said we were probably 4 sold out shows a month away from making it,
right.
It always felt, like it was sort of working, but at the end of the month you'd look and be like, it's not quite working,
Who came up with the Frank Chu name?
Well,
for the place?
My business partner, Robert Levy, had worked downtown before and just had gotten to know Frank a little bit.
You do, yeah.
And so we just ended up kind of hanging out with Frank and asking him if it was okay. Before we knew him, it was like nervous.
Sure.
Yeah. And so then, I can remember, it was this whole thing, like we didn't have enough money to do what we were doing. That was the other piece. We had just enough money to get started and open the doors, and then just like lose them all, no one came for a long time, to a customer, it feels like nothing, but when no one comes for a month, the first month, you're just like bleeding money.
Right.
But we had said from the beginning, God, wouldn't it be cool if Frank Chu ever came here? And then the first day we opened the doors, and Frank Chu was like the third person through the door. And he,
with a sign.
Yeah.
Of course.
And if you've been to shows, which you both have,
yeah.
Frank would introduce the shows, right? He would get up on stage. There would be some nights where, for whatever reason, somebody wouldn't want him to do it. Mm-hmm. But for the most part, we had him introduce every show, that we did. And so that, that was, he had his complete blessing. And so I was sort of very connected to Frank Chu for a number of years. Mm-hmm. He would crash at my house, I just was at Frank Chu's house maybe 2 months ago too.
Awesome. You guys are tight.
Yeah. I don't see him as much as I used to, but yeah, I know him very well. It was 7 total years, but Robert took the last 3 because somewhere along in there in about 2006, I started to get calls from the Crepe Place owner, and he was saying, look, the original, he'd owned it for 30 something years. And he said, I'm done. I want to sell it, but I want to sell it to you.
Wow. And
at first I said, that sounds great, but I'm busy doing this club thing. And then I realized, oh no, this is a really good idea. I should do this. Bought the Crepe Place. And I had worked there for many years. And so I knew exactly, it had been floundering at the end. It was kind of that, very sort of, and almost a predictable situation where the owner was getting older and he just wasn't paying as close attention. It was sort of making it because it was much beloved by the community, and much beloved by a very good staff too. And a lot of which had worked there in the years before when I had worked there. And so I just sort of, it was a unique situation where I knew exactly what needed to happen to make this place good again.
The spark.
And I now had all this experience running a music venue. Mm-hmm. And so I thought, I can just I can move this down to Santa Cruz. And it's the perfect kind of town where it's a kind of a tour stop for people that's totally skippable. You do it if you want to do it. You do it if it makes sense, but you don't have to play Santa Cruz.
Right.
But if there's a good spot in Santa Cruz, why not? Mm-hmm. So and that ended up being completely true. And so a ton of bands, it was not unusual for years and years for a band to be playing the Great American Music Hall in San Francisco and to be playing the Crepe Place in Santa Cruz, that because of the economy of scale of the size of the town,
Right.
it just made sense. And we fed everybody delicious crepes all the time. Had this big garden in the back. It's kind of just like a nice little idyllic spot, and it just for whatever reason it worked, even though it didn't even have a stage. Like it was you just played on the floor
In like a corner of the room?
kind of like one half of a room that was the bar room. Like if you looked at the room by day, you'd say there's no way a show could really happen here. But then they do every night, and they still do.
Awesome.
They still do. Yeah.
That was Adam Bergeron. Join us Thursday for part 2, when Adam will share his story of buying the Balboa and some of the theater's history. Music for Storied San Francisco is by Otis McDonald. Film photography by Michelle Kilfeather. The show is hosted and produced by me, Jeff Hunt. Our website is storiedsf.com, where you can browse more than 100 episodes, check out all of our live events, and visit our store to help support us. Please follow us on Twitter and Instagram, and subscribe to the show on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. If that's Apple Podcasts or iTunes, please do us a favor and rate and review what we do. And if you have any feedback for us or suggested guests, our email is storiedsf@gmail.com. Thanks for listening.